Good morning, I guess. Just want to point out for all of you feeling slightly sour at being here this early in the morning. I literally just got in from flying from South Africa. I left sometime yesterday at 12 o'clock and haven't slept yet. For the most part, that's going to be an excuse that I'll use throughout the talk for just general lameness. So really quickly, we're going to try to rush through some of the talk to get us back on schedule. So I'll do a really quick who I am, why this talk. So my name, Haroon at thinkst.com. Been around doing pen testing stuff and security stuff for a while. Written a few papers, released some tools. There's really poor standards in the publishing industry, so contributed to some books. But for the most part, I've been playing around in pen testing for quite a while. And that's kind of, I want to use it as a build-up to say that when I pick on pen testing, I'm picking on it after having done pen testing for quite a bit. So I used to work at SensePost for about 10 years, okay? So I was head of the technical team for a while. We basically grew a whole bunch of pen testers. We have courses that we used to give at Vegas, Black Hat Las Vegas, where we test pen testers. So basically a fair bit of experience just in the pen testing scene. Which takes me to my thesis, and the point for discussion today, which basically says that generally we seem to be doing something pretty wrong in pen testing. Okay, a little while earlier this year, I wrote a blog post, and I tried to downplay it as much as possible, like most security folks. Okay, and we called it our upcoming security apocalypse. Okay, and interestingly enough, being a technical guy, most of our thoughts are normally technical. But when we spoke about our upcoming apocalypse, what we are talking about is a crisis we're heading for in InfoSec, but it's more a crisis of confidence. Okay, and you'll start to see a few people bringing this up more and more nowadays. But what I was really getting at here is that we're starting to enter a different phase with InfoSec. And not all of us have noticed that we've made the transition. Okay, so if you talk to InfoSec guys, you'll often see them making the same sort of whining noises that we were making in the 90s and in the early 2000s. Management don't buy in, nobody buys in, this doesn't happen. But if you look around, all of us are here in the middle of the week. We all have relatively well-paying jobs. Management have bought in. Okay, it's not quite the same situation as it was in the 90s when all of us were being forced to do it part-time and nobody actually cared about it. And what's interesting is we're still using the same excuses even though lots of stuff has changed. So I'd suggest you go back, you follow that link, go read the blog post. If nothing else, I need visitors on the blog. But what's interesting, or at least interesting to me, is that at some point during this whole thing, InfoSec guys kind of declared mission accomplished. Okay, we kind of had threats under control, and we kind of sat back with it's okay, we've got this stuff. Okay, and recently we've seen the likes of LulzSec and Anon come and show us why we're wrong. And one of the important points that I'm trying to make here is that we've gotten to a point now where people enter the field and people are doing InfoSec professionally, and boards right now aren't aware of what we know. Okay, so if we the technical guys doing the work, securing companies, pen testing for companies, boards, for the most part, don't know how little control we've actually got of this whole situation. Okay, so if you speak to board members, you'll often find them saying like, yeah, we hear whines from the security folks, but security folks whine, that's what they do. Okay, but most of us security guys are just hoping that the ownage doesn't happen while it's on our watch, okay? Because we don't really have much more. We're kind of all just hoping that it doesn't happen to us. And if you speak to most boards, you'll find that they don't know this. And for the most part, the boards actually believe that they are doing something right because they're paying us. Okay, they've got InfoSec teams now and they've got incident response teams now. And I'm willing to bet that if you went to some board members and told them what their risk exposure was in a way that only you know they're exposed, most of them will just have a fit. Okay, if you told them that they were literally one ZeroDay away from getting all their financials published on the internet, they'd question why they pay us. Okay, and part of what I'm saying is that we've got a serious problem here. And in a way, I think it's a lot like the global financial crisis that happened. Okay, because you see lots of money changing hands, lots of people getting rich, there's lots of surface levels, checks and balances, but ultimately, nobody's really saying the truth that needs to be said. Okay, and the whole thing is a lot more brittle than most of us would admit. And one of the arguments that often come through is, well, we haven't been hacked yet, so surely it's not such a big deal. Okay, it's worked for us so far. And the logic kind of goes that every day that nothing happens means that it's increasingly likely that nothing will happen. Okay, and this quote was stolen from a talk given by Dan Gear, which is why it sounds cleverer than the rest of the slides. But what Dr. Gear points out is that this is exactly what Taleb was talking about in the Black Swan, when he says that the reduced likeliness of it, or the fact that it doesn't happen, doesn't make it less likely to happen in the future. It just makes it more surprising when it actually does happen. Okay, and this is kind of the situation that most of our businesses are running in these days. So before I go on, I'm going to do a simple, quick test just to check my hypothesis. If you guys imagine the company that you work for, the companies you represent, and you imagine the most senior guy, or the guy who touches the most valuable data in that organization. Okay, the simple test that I'm going for here is, would you be willing to bet that you've got that guy protected? Okay, so if you're looking at a financial, you take your CFO. Are you willing to bet that he won't get owned tomorrow and all the financials that he touches gets published on the internet? Okay, and if you're willing to make, out of interest, anyone with a quick hand raise that you're willing to bet your CFO is safe? Anyone? It's generally not wise to raise your hand against the guy with the mic, but I think the point is simply enough proved. Okay, and one of the things that I'm getting at is we have this problem with InfoSec. Okay, we've got this hard problem, and then we went and pitched pen testing as a solution, and now we've got two problems. Okay, and you'll see a lot of what a lot of the picking on that I'm going to be doing today is specifically on pen testing, and in part it's because I think that pen testing has kind of run away from us. Okay, if you do a search for pen testing services, you're getting something like 7.9 million hits. Okay, because everyone who can run Nmap and Nessus these days can open up a pen testing company. It's just not that hard to do. So before I get into my big complaints, I'm going to do the quick kills really quickly. Okay, so anytime people complain about pen testing, someone says, yes, but the problem is we only get limited scope. So management or the customer tells us we can only aim at these 10 boxes and we can't do social engineering or we can't do a phishing attack, all of that stuff. Okay, I'm ignoring that. That's a stupid, in that case, a client who's waiting to get taken, or if it's at your company, it's just an unrealistic expectation. The second one I'm ignoring is just lame pen testers. If you're dealing with people who don't know what they're doing, you've got a big problem. Okay, and the third one, which I'm going to gloss over really quickly, is the operational security of testers themselves. Okay, one of the things that should be interesting over the last while is the number of pen test or security companies that have been getting owned. Okay, so what you're seeing up there, does anyone recognize the diagram? Okay, a few of you do. Okay, that's from ZFO, which is Zero for Owned, which is an underground magazine that came up and in that issue published mail spools and home directories of Dan Kaminsky and Kevin Mitnick. And I believe the same guys hit a whole bunch of other researchers. But what's interesting is when all these security researchers got their home directories published, many of which included customer information, customer IPs, stuff like that in it, I can tell you honestly, as a security guy, I was going, yeah, there but for the grace of God go I. They could have taken me almost as easily, and who knows what would have been in my home directory the day I was taken. Okay, and one of the things we have to start questioning here is how much risk is introduced to your organization just by your pen testers. Okay, pen testers are pretty busy guys. They're doing one customer and then they're moving on to another customer, and who knows when they get taken and what that means. But what I'm saying here is different, okay? My central thesis is that even with full scope and elite testers, I'm saying that pen testing probably shouldn't be your first choice, okay? And I've got a minor caveat here which says, if you're testing the response of your security team, or if you want a binary answer, can I be broken into or not, okay? Then go do pen testing. But if that's not the question you're trying to answer, if you're trying to secure your organization, then pen testing should feature pretty low on your list of activities. Okay, so I'm going to do a quick poll here. How many of you here have been involved in a pen test in the last 2 years? Okay, almost all of the room. If you assumed, and we'll cover the whole ZeroDay thing in a little bit, if I had access to ZeroDay, how many ZeroDay would I require to get to your company's crown jewels? So I asked this to a whole bunch of my friends and to people who are much later than me, and for the most part I kind of hedged my bet and I went in with, yes, I think that my thesis is with 3 ZeroDays I'd be able to get to your crown jewels. And interestingly, almost everyone came back and said, you know, in truth, in most cases the answer is 1. Okay, unless they were seriously air-gapped, which is just a small subset of people, 1 ZeroDay is all it takes to get to all of the crown jewels. Okay, and in honesty, this one point is the thing that spurs this whole talk for me, because we're in a pretty broken situation if networks are 1 ZeroDay away from their crown jewels being published on the internet, and we don't seem to be doing anything about it. We get pen testers in and they do some stuff, but it's fundamentally not changing the fact that we're 1 attack away from losing everything. Okay, which segs nicely into the question of ZeroDay and pen tests. Okay, and it's interesting because for a long time, we question the value of using ZeroDay on pen tests. What's the use if you can't tell the customer there's a patch for it? You're going to have to tell the customer wait for ZeroDay. What's the point using ZeroDay? And what's interesting, you find that ZeroDay splits pen testers into 2 groups, because you get the guys who have piles of ZeroDay and they basically scream every opportunity they get, well, wow, if you're not using ZeroDay, then your pen tests suck. And then you get guys who routinely don't use ZeroDay and they're getting in with misconfiguration and password brute forcing and stuff like that. And they claim that you never need ZeroDay because we can break into networks without it. Okay, so let's take a look at that argument first. So you get pen testers who say, look, I managed to break in every test we do, and we never ever need custom ZeroDay, so why do we need it? And the easy answer is because the point wasn't just to see how you would break in, the point was to see how anyone would break in. Okay, and one of the things that I'm trying to get to here is because of the way we're aiming our pen tests, we're skipping out entire arms of vulnerability. There's some things that we're just not looking at, and it's one of the things that I want to get to. So the obvious question is, are attackers actively using ZeroDay in the wild? Okay, and it's interesting because a few years ago, Rolf, the guy in the front, Rolf and I used to argue about whether there was any point to testing security anyway, because it seemed like no attackers were doing the kind of stuff we were doing. Okay, and slowly you saw attackers maturing and attackers doing the sort of stuff. And then we used to do these ridiculous SQL injection things, and was anybody actually doing it, or was it just something that we did for fun? Okay, and now you see LoudSec and Anon doing those sorts of things. And the question then would be, is anybody actively using ZeroDay for attacks? Okay, and fortunately for us, 2010, 2011 was the year of mass ownage. Okay, if ever we felt security was pointless, 2010, 2011 showed us people getting owned on a large scale. And one of the interesting ones, I'm going to skip Stuxnet, was Operation Aurora. Okay, so all of you would have heard about it. Google essentially went, published on their blog, and said, they made quite a low-key announcement on their blog that basically said, we're going to change the way we deal with China. And they said it's because we were attacked, and we think there's more to this attack than meets the eye. And what's interesting here, does anyone know how many companies were attacked with Aurora? So Google were the guys that owned up to it. Okay, something like 38 companies were involved in Aurora. Okay, so it later came out that Disney and DuPont and GM and all of these companies were actively targeted by essentially what at the time was a zero-day attack. Okay, and whenever you talk about Aurora, one of the things that people point out is that it was an old zero-day, so it targeted an old version of Internet Explorer. And almost everyone says it as if, well, we should be less worried because they targeted an old browser. Okay, but there's two things that mitigate that. One is the exploit could have been ported forward to work on current versions of IE. But the other thing that's interesting is that they knew that that exploit would work. So it means that there was some degree of profiling that went in beside just writing the exploit. Okay, and it shows a degree of sophistication that's often ignored. The second thing that's interesting, and it's kind of hard to do any talk without talking about HBGary, but I'm not going to talk here about how HBGary got owned. Instead, I'm going to talk about the treasure chest that came out thanks to HBGary emails. Okay, and even if we ignore Aaron Barr, you'll see here email from them saying, well, we can sell this zero-day, we can also do zero-day development for you. And later on, we saw mails from them saying, please see our list of zero-day. And even further, more lists of zero-day that they were selling. And of course, if they're selling it and someone's buying it, you can't imagine that people are buying it for academic purposes. Okay, people are buying it to use against corporations. And if you ever looked at the HBGary mails, one of the most interesting things to come out was the news of endgame systems. Okay, and endgame systems were interesting. If you look up here, you see Project Maui, where for $2.5 million per year, they'd sell you 25 zero-day, okay, already packaged as Metasploit modules. And again, the obvious thing here is if people are buying it and buying it at those rates, you'd be foolish to think that those attacks were not being used against corporations in the wild. But of course, zero-day doesn't have to be that expensive, certainly not the 2.5 million price range. One of the guys that made it clear for us was Charlie Miller. Okay, so Charlie Miller, other than owning stuff left, right, and center, a little while back wrote a paper called The Legitimate Vulnerability Market, where he literally tried to sell zero-day and then tabulated everything and said, well, had a meeting with this guy in the NSA today, offered him $80,000, he said no. And what's interesting is he originally pitched his zero-day, which was an SMB bug, a bug in Samba, for $80,000. He eventually sold it for $50,000. Okay, and it's all there and published in a paper. But again, what's interesting is the moment he decided he wanted to sell it, he found the buyer pretty easily. But $50,000 still sounds a little extreme. In the same paper, he talks about another bug, which he tried to sell and got bargained down to $11,000, eventually $8,000, and then actually couldn't sell it because the customer got skittish and the bug was cleaned up before he sold. But the whole point is we start to see the price of zero-day now approaching 8,000, 10,000. And of course the question then is, what about Pwn to Own at CanSec West? Okay, so Pwn to Own at CanSec West is a contest held every year. They basically put up these machines and say, can you hack them? If you hack them, you get a nominal fee. I think it's like between $5,000 and $10,000. You get a laptop. But what's interesting is those things get popped every year. Okay, and this year, a few months ago, Dino Daizovi did a really interesting talk called Attacker Math. Okay, and his whole, the crux of his talk was that we should be focusing our defenses differently. And his thesis here basically says that you can't even take the price paid at Pwn to Own as the price of zero-day because the customer is getting fame. Okay, and actually, in reality, the guys who really do it are doing it without that fame. So actually, it's worth less than that. And he ends up at a number at somewhere between 5 and 10K. Okay, so he's saying you can get this, you can get active working zero-day between 5 and 10K if you're interested. While we're on Tauntaun, I quickly want to discuss other quick lessons that we should be taking from it. So one of them that's interesting is, what we've got here is a quick snippet of how people generally feel during Tauntaun, and you see it on the mailing lists. Okay, so we all feel secure that our browsers are safe. Someone comes along, someone like Niels from MWR comes along and pops something, and then we're all nervous, because between the time that we know that the contest was won and the time that Microsoft or whoever releases the patch, we know that there's an exploit out in the wild, and we don't have access to it. Okay, and as soon as Microsoft released that patch, we all feel comfortable again. Okay, but the obvious thing is that those exploits exist all the time. Okay, it wasn't just created for Tauntaun. In fact, for Charlie Muller, he once sat on a bug between 2008, 2009, and then used it the following year to win again, because he couldn't win twice in the same year. Okay, and what's really interesting is that the browser has quite obviously become the weakest link on our machines. Okay, in 2010, I did a talk at Black Hat on the history of memory corruption, and one of the things that's really obvious is that browsers are the new place to play. They give you fine-grained control of memory space, and so no matter how many protections go in, the browser is currently a good place for attackers to play. If you look at the Tauntaun contest, when it first started, they basically regarded browser attacks as a second-class hack. Okay, there was the initial prize, and then if nobody got that, they'd reduce the contest to a browser hacking thing. Nowadays, it's all about the browser hacking. Okay, and the reason I find this interesting is because when you do a pen test, you won't often find browsers showing up on that pen test report. Okay, you'll find pen tests still being done with the scan the server, scan for vulnerabilities. Browsers just aren't showing up, even though they're most clearly the most vulnerable thing we currently have on our machines. And so again, I'll go for a quick test. What's the current version of Flash? Anyone? Current version of Java that should be running on your machine. The run is disqualified from now on. Okay, what's interesting is attacks, like right now, attacking Java is the most comfortable way to go if you're attacking someone's browser. There was a time when you speak to a group of pen testers and they'll name you their favorite MSO blah 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 because they know they go on a pen test, they're hitting the server with that and they're getting system. Okay, currently, hitting the browser like that is the way to go, but nobody's really paying attention to it because that's just not the way we're doing our pen tests. Okay, and it's something that we need to change. I'm going to skip through this really quickly, but if you look at what's happening with jailbreaking, okay, you see two interesting things that are worth noting. One is that when the guys pop out with jailbreak exploits, for one thing, most of them have been supremely elegant, but the other thing is that nobody knew of these guys before they did the jailbreaks for their respective phones. Okay, so there's these guys who none of us have ever heard of, and they're pulling off remote super cool exploits against these devices, and we never heard of them previously. Okay, and it gives you some inkling into how reasonably easily this sort of technology exists, or this sort of tech exists for determined attackers. Okay, and all of it is basically just to say that if we're ignoring ZeroDay on our testing, we're ignoring reality, we're ignoring a whole section of attacks, and we can't anymore. But now we get something else that pushes from the other direction. Okay, so Dave Vitale says it takes about 450 hours to create good, reliable exploits. Okay, and the average pen test is not going to give you 450 hours to sit there and create ZeroDay for the systems you're testing. So creating a ZeroDay for everything during your engagement is unlikely. Okay, and we're going to have to figure out some way around it. And even if you could create ZeroDay for everything, it's not really going to solve your problem. Okay, and the reason for this is if you take a typical network setup and you are up against some sort of ninja pen tester who had ZeroDay for both your firewalls, and then had ZeroDay for servers in your DMZ, and then had ZeroDay for your DC, okay, it's just going to become an arms race. He's testing you with the ZeroDay he has, but what about the ZeroDay that he doesn't have that some other attacker has? Okay, how do you measure that stuff and how do you test against it? Okay, it starts to become a silly intractable problem. One of the interesting things here is, if you just take the stuff we've discussed now, if you just take this question that says, well, the browser is the most vulnerable thing we have, and our CFO is browsing the naked web and then he's reading out financials, if you asked me the question that way, I could give you 10 solutions to it. Okay, let him surf from an iPad. Don't let him surf the web with his machine. Do some sort of RDP solution. So that, but what's interesting is we're not asking that question, and so we never get to solving that problem. Okay, because for us it's just not top of mind. We were supposed to be, with pen testers, emulating attackers. But it seems like these days, all pen testers do is emulate other pen testers. Okay, there's a pretty specific signature, and you can kind of tell that that's how a pen test looks. Okay, and so while I'm there, we'll start talking about professional pen testers. And here I'm talking about guys that are worth their stuff, that are really good. And for a long time, I always prided myself on this, because I tell people that you could tell professional pen testers by their tool chains. Okay, they weren't coming at you just with Nmap and Nessus. They had robust tool chains that said, okay, we've got root here, how can we custom make our tunnel through? How can we get our toolkits up there? Okay, and a few years back, we did a talk called Pushing a Camel Through the Eye of the Needle. Other than being a supremely stupidly named talk, the crux of the talk was how to do good extrusion from networks. Okay, so how to get your data in and out of networks despite hostile environments. And I want us to look at this. I'll whiz through it really quickly, mainly because it shows us something interesting. This was an email that we sent in 2002. Okay, and what we were talking about here was cases where you had SQL injection on a customer and there was no way for data to come back to you. Okay, and this trick which almost everyone uses and is in most tools nowadays is if you get your SQL injection string to run, get it to do an NS lookup, and on your side you sniff on the network and you basically see the data coming back, and DNS becomes a back channel for you to get your data through. Okay, but what I want you to notice here is that was in 2002. Okay, and so visually the attack would go something like this. You do an NS lookup, and even if there's no traffic coming back, stuff would follow its DNS chain and get all the way back to you. Okay, in 2007, we released a tool, and Squeezer was a way to get robust data in and out of networks with SQL injection. And one of the channels that Squeezer used, again, was DNS. Except this time, Squeezer was a lot more robust. So if you had a binary on the remote system, Squeezer would break up that binary into DNS requests, pump those out, and you could reassemble the binary on the remote end. Okay, and then we did marginal improvements to it. So instead of needing to physically call NS lookup, you could run commands inside SQL Server that would trigger an NS lookup, so you could get the same result without elevated privileges. Okay, what I want you to notice here is we started on this route with pen testing, and we keep making marginal improvements to that stuff, but we have to question how much this actually adds to the customer. And I'm going to touch on two more things that we did here. And Glenn, who's in the crowd, released a tool a few years back called Reader. And Reader essentially worked like this. If you compromised a web server, you ran Reader as an ASP or JSP or PHP script, and then you ran a little proxy on your machine. And anytime you connected to your machine, Reader would then break that up into HTTP requests, send it over to your script, and then tunnel that data clean through. Okay, so it becomes a clean way to transport data through. And then in that same year when we did a talk, we actually figured out that through SQL injection, we could build binaries inside of SQL Server. Okay, so SQL Server now allows you to create assemblies. Okay, and so what we did with a straight SQL injection attack was to create a binary inside of SQL Server. Okay, and we found different ways of doing this, different clean ways of doing this. But in the end, what it meant is that we could do something like this. So we could take Glenn's squeezer tool. I've lost my mouse. We could take Glenn's squeezer tool. I saw it pop by briefly. Forget the mouse. We could create the component of it sitting inside of SQL Server. We could then make a connection on the outside to Glenn's proxy, which then spoke to the SQL injection tool, which tunnels all of your traffic over SQL injection to the SQL server, which then unpackages your TCP traffic and releases it on the inside of your network. Okay, we did this and we felt particularly clever. Okay, but what's interesting is we're starting to tread pretty close to the classic case of the problem they talk about when they talk about draining the swamp. Okay, and you know the story that we were sent to drain the swamp, and while we were there, we figure out that we've got to fight some alligators because there's alligators in the swamp. And after a few years, we start building tools. We start building better alligator fighting tools, and we've got Super Alligator-O-Matic 2000. Okay, and after many years, we forget that we were there to drain the swamp. Okay, and it starts to feel like this is where we're going with lots of the stuff we're doing with pen testing. Okay, we keep making marginal improvements on our pen testing techniques, but we forget what we were actually sent there to do originally. Okay, and we keep bumping into a problem of coverage, which essentially says, if you go in, and I'm going to fly through this, and you start looking at only certain components of the network, you miss entire avenues of attack. Okay, and I'm going to go through this briefly just because of time, but if you take a network setup like this, and if you had pen testers come in who went after unpatched or went after using memory corruption bugs, they could take out a pair of your servers, and you'd get a pen test report basically telling you you've got a patch problem. Okay, or you could get your pen test done by SQL injection ninjas who would use the SQL injection attack, elevate privileges. You'd get your pen test report and you'd have stuff to fix. Okay, or you could get guys who now focus on the social engineering side and they send spear phishing attack to someone. Okay, and what I'm going for here is that you could get all of these and all three would be valid pen test results, but all three potentially miss out all of the other attack vectors. Okay, so it's possible these days to have a pen test, be perfectly happy with your results, but be perfectly ownable the next day, just because we're lacking serious code coverage or serious network coverage. And this then brings us to another problem, which is the fact that pen testing companies today are almost the classic definition of a market for lemons. Okay, so Market for Lemons was a 70s economics paper that we'll go through really quickly. And basically it said that if you've got this market, people selling used cars, and guys can either sell a car that's a lemon, so an inferior car, or a car that in the original paper they called a cherry. And so sellers put these cars into the market, but because of the asymmetry of information, buyers don't know whether a car's a lemon or a cherry. Okay, and so buyers are going to offer their price at about the average. And what this means is that over time, guys who had cherries will stop putting cherries into the market. Okay, and what you get is it classically steps towards market failure as the market only supports lemons. Okay, and the reason a market for lemons exists is because there's an asymmetry of information, because the seller knows something that the buyer doesn't know and the buyer can't verify. And this is almost exactly where we are with pen testing today. Okay, and it's why you often see pen testing firms spring up and make a big name for themselves for a little while and then gradually disappear over time. Okay, it's a process that seems to happen pretty consistently. And so if we look at pen testing, we've got a problem with incomplete coverage. We almost always avoid the zero-day question or handle it badly. We avoid highly likely attacks just because we don't really know how to deal with it. we've got misaligned goals. So we're out there trying to build Alligator Fighter-O-Matic 2000, when actually that doesn't really matter to the customer. The customer just needed to know he needed to patch that vulnerability. And we've got the problem that increasingly we're building a market for lemons. So the question, I guess, is why is pen testing still so popular? Okay, and the easy answer, or one of the easy answers, is that these days, pen testing is really, really easy to sell. Okay, you go to a customer knows a pen test. So customer knows he needs to do something for security, he goes, sure, give me 2 pen tests this year. Okay, and it's almost not important that it's not solving a problem, it's something that he knows, and so there's people willing to sell it to them. And pen testing feels like you're doing something, okay? It feels like you're making some kind of strides. What are you doing about security? Oh, we've got these hackers coming in trying to break into the network. Okay, then you must be doing something right. Okay, and pen testing, interestingly, always delivers a result. Okay, so you find all of us as pen testers are normally pretty cocky. Okay, so they'll look down on the IDS guys who never managed to catch a real zero-day in their life. Because you know that every time you do a pen test, you're likely to own the network. Okay, so you kind of feel like you're getting a result every time you go out, but it's not a result that matters if the customer is still just 1 0-day away from losing their crown jewels. And I think that what we have here is a hill climbing problem. Okay, so if you're looking at mathematical optimization, or if you're looking at search theory, they normally talk about a hill climbing problem as you basically pick a solution and you keep iterating and you keep getting better at it until you can't get any better at it. Okay, and pen testing started at some point as a half a solution, and we kept making pen tests better and better and better until we got to the point that we do really good at pen tests. Okay, but one of the classic problems, or the hill climbing problem, is that you get stuck on a local optimum. Okay, there may be another path that if you started on that hill and iterated, you would have got to the perfect solution, but because you started on this hill, you're going to iterate up to a point and then not get any more better solutions. Okay, and that's one of the things that I'm saying we desperately need to relook at. So really quickly, guys are proposing changes. There's a pen test standard. I'm not sure how many of you guys have seen. Guys are putting together something called P-test. Okay, and what's interesting is if you look at the P-test standard, that's what the P-test standard currently looks like, and it hasn't been released yet. Okay, so I don't know, I'm guessing that that stuff's not going to be widely adopted by everyone. Okay, it's just a guess. Adam Shostak over at Microsoft had an interesting idea with a board game called Elevation of Privilege, where he's kind of tried to make a board game out of teaching developers to threat model. Okay, but quite specifically he aims it at developers, and it's aimed at teaching them what attacks are and what attacks could be. One of the alternatives is, why don't we just pen test by Visio? Okay, here's what the network looks like. We can see an attack there. Let's fix it, let's verify it. Okay, and the obvious reason why that wouldn't work is because the map's not the territory. Okay, lots of the time, what's on Visio is not going to be what the network actually is. Okay, so if we have to do something, we can't completely remove operator skill. Okay, because certain types of attackers are just inherently evil, and they're going to know stuff that people don't. But we should be aiming to maximize those guys' time. Okay, and my suggestion here is that we move from our currently purely adversarial hostile testing to something that's slightly more collaborative. A long time ago, we made this jump in app testing. I'm not sure how many of you remember when we first used to use Nessus. We'd run Nessus scans, and Nessus would try to intelligently determine stuff remotely as well as it could, until at some point, Renault and the Nessus guys figured out, hold on, we're the good guys. Give Nessus creds and let it log in. Okay, we don't have to view the stuff purely as an attacker, it's our networks. Okay, and for lots of the things with pen testing, we're still doing that. We're taking the stuff adversarially when we don't necessarily have to. Okay, it won't work if we do our testing purely paper-based or friendly-based, because one of the things that you miss is stuff that nobody expected on the pen test. So you take a random low-value box and it happened to have passwords for the whole network, and we still want that stuff to come through. And so my one suggestion for this is that we look at gamification. Okay, and gamification's a big word nowadays because everyone's trying to gamify everything. Guys come in for sick days, let's give them a badge. I don't mean that type of gamification, or that type of gamification. Essentially what I'm talking about is doing a pen test the same way we were doing it before, but the big things that I'm talking about introducing is starting off by figuring out who our opponents are likely to be. Okay, so if you're running a bank, yes, you're worried about LulzSec, but you're also worried about guys who have a certain budget that can come after you. You need to start categorizing the type of attacker who's likely to come after you. Okay, I'm going to skip through this quickly because they're about to throw me off stage. You need to figure out what your data is worth. Okay, and one of the things that I'm saying here is if you say that a typical attacker against my network is willing to invest 100K to come after me, then I'm saying we can extend this to say, well, if we assume that it's going to take us 20K to pay someone for ZeroDay, then give your pen tester 5 ZeroDay cards. Okay, and as ridiculous as it sounds at first blush, what I'm essentially saying is during the pen test, your pen tester should be able to tell you, I want to use one of my ZeroDay cards, give me system on that server. Okay, and it doesn't matter whether you like it or whether you don't like it, you give him a command prompt on that server. Okay, because what I'm trying to avoid here is the case where you are limited by my access to ZeroDay. And it doesn't matter how many ZeroDay I have, I could not have the one that matters to you. Okay, what you want is for me to give you likely attacks, and the ZeroDay card works for this. Like I say, it retains pen test serendipity. Basically means you give me shell on that box, which wasn't important to you, but I find a whole bunch of passwords on it that are then valuable to me. Okay, from this, a few other cards quickly seem reasonable. Unlimited pivot and tunnel cards. Okay, again, what we did with reader and what Metasploit does with Meterpreter, or what Core Impact does with pivoting, essentially, you know, if I can take that box, I can pivot on that box, okay? It's stupid for you to be limited to my skill pivoting on that box, because maybe the real attacker isn't. Okay, we should be able to talk through that stuff like adults and say, I can run code on that box, I should now be able to run stuff from that machine. Okay, you need to get out of the stuff where I need to prove to you that I'm cool. I should be able to just get a shell from that machine and work from there. And for all the pen testers in the house, the question is, will it make pen tests less fun? And the answer is, it probably will. Okay, but in truth, we can't keep getting paid to have fun. Okay, the point of it was to actually solve the customer's problem. And there will be times where the customer is going to say, I don't believe you. I don't think you could pivot there. And that's cool. He can then pay you for a week to come up with a solution, and you can show how clever you are, and you can release a tool. Okay, but essentially you shouldn't need it, and you should be able to widen the scope considerably. It'll allow us to focus on stuff other than just what's our favorite toolkit. You end up with a cleverer client. And so lastly, before I go, the question is, do we really need to change? Like, as pen testers, the stuff's working reasonably well. Like, do we need to? And I think we desperately have to. Okay, because like I said, I think we're in this bad spot right now where stuff's going to go bad shortly, and we're not really going to have anything to say for it. We're going to be shuffling and looking at our feet when the foot hits the shen. Recently, when Sony got hacked and RSA got hacked and Lockheed Martin got hacked, all over Twitter, there were security pen test guys silently shilling their companies going, when last have they had a pen test? I wonder if those guys had a pen test. And the honest answer is, any one of our customers could have been taken just like Sony and Lockheed, and we would have done a pen test on them last month. Okay? The honest answer is that doing a pen test doesn't guarantee that those guys wouldn't get taken like that. We were just saying that in the hope that someone from Sony or Lockheed would say, hey, you're right, I should get a pen test from you. And we're just not helping that stuff get any better. And it's my hypothesis, it's my thesis that pen testing is rapidly approaching becoming the new antivirus. Okay, an antivirus didn't start off being lame. They started off thinking they were solving a problem. It's just that they just carried on solving that niche problem and forgot that actually the point was to keep us more secure. And pen testing is now on that route because we've got guys willing to pay us to do it. And so it doesn't matter whether it helps or not. We just keep charging them and they just keep paying us. So if you sell pen tests, let's make sure the customer really needs one. Let's try to bring integrity back to it. So let's try to sell them what they need, not what they think they want. If you buy pen tests, from now on, if somebody suggests a pen test to you, you should be questioning that guy straight off. It should be a big red flag to you that someone's trying to sell you something and maybe the rest of the stuff he says should be taken with a pinch of salt. If you think you're a smart guy, and I think InfoSec seems to attract guys like us who think we are, let's start thinking again, okay? Because we need to reset. The pen testing thing isn't working. And one of the rays of sunshine in terms of resets is that quite specifically, when you're trying to beat the local maxima problem, the way to solve it is with a reset. Okay, so you climb a hill, you get to as high as you can on that hill. At some point you reset because maybe now you land on another hill. Okay, and then you try that one and see where that takes you. And right now we desperately need a reset. It's about the end of my time. I suspect they'll allow time for a few questions or for people to throw stuff at me. So if not, you can grab me on Twitter. I'm a low volume tweeter, so I don't think that's worth much. Blog, mail me your questions or abuse. But yeah, thanks for not throwing stuff.